particles of a very rare alloy, and it's a titanium and antimony alloy. And the antimony specifically is around the 18%, it's about 18% of the particle. Now, and that's consistent among all three particles. And different parts of the tie is the other thing to note as far as that's concerned. Why this is important is because I did a deep dive into the titanium antimony particles, and I found that this was a particle that had, this was a metal, an alloy that had never been produced commercially or disseminated commercially. Also happened to find some patents, U.S. patents, and actually a couple foreign patents that as well that relate to these particles, appear to relate to these particles, that pointed to a very specific company called Rem Cru Titanium. It was then called Rem Cru Titanium. So, to make a long story short, it does appear that the only possible place that these three particles could have come from was Rem Cru Titanium. Now, just for clarity purposes, Rem Cru Titanium is a company that existed in the 50s. Then they changed their name to Crucible Steel, and then in the late 60s they changed their name once again to became part of Coal Industries. So for our purposes today, we're just going to refer to it as Rem Cru Titanium, but it's all the same company. So I had a conversation. Rem Cru Titanium no longer exists. It's been split up and sold off in pieces and chunks and so forth. But one of the pieces is a company called Crucible Industries based in Syracuse, New York. So I picked up the phone, gave the president of the company a call. This was last April, and had a conversation with him about the particles that were found on the tie. And he said to me that it appears to me what you're looking at here is a tie that was in the research lab, specifically the titanium research lab, just given the array of particles on the tie, because it's important to note, not only do we have the three exceptionally rare titanium antimony alloy particles, but there is a whole bunch of other stuff on that tie as well. So that got me thinking, okay, it appears that D.B. Cooper, whoever this guy was, worked in the titanium research lab for Rem Cru. Managed to get a hold of a guy who was retired, who worked in this exact spot, this exact division from the 50s into the 90s. The man himself is basically 90 years of age at this point, and managed to get a lot of good information from him. Among the other things I learned is that in the titanium research lab, there were a total of about 8 men that worked there. That's it, 8. Very small universe of people. And importantly, these 8 men wore ties to work. And that's obviously a requirement because we're dealing with D.B. Cooper's tie. Now, there were assistants and others that worked in their research lab as well, but they did not wear ties. And so that was one of the things I learned. I also learned that a couple of the engineers would travel pretty regularly to Boeing. This is just something that popped. I said, yeah, we would travel to Boeing. And we'd also travel to Lockheed and a couple other companies because they were subcontractors. Rem Cru Titanium was a major subcontractor for Boeing. They create specialty metals for Boeing and other aerospace manufacturers that are used not only for military applications, but commercial applications as well. And which was obviously very intriguing to me because it does appear that D.B. Cooper was familiar with the Puget Sound region, Seattle area, and Boeing. One other thing, and there's actually some sort of reference to it because it's not here anymore, I found out that Rem Cru also created parts and metals for the Boeing 727. So that ultimately led me to a specific person, this gentleman who passed away in 2002, his name is Vince Peterson. So having said that, we've got 3 other gentlemen up here who have also started digging into Rem Cru Titanium, and I know that they have their eyes set on another gentleman who worked at Rem Cru Titanium that they're looking into or digging into as a person of interest. So let's just open it up here as far as that goes. I don't know who wants to talk a little bit about just sort of Rem Cru and what you guys, because I know they've kind of worked together, the three of them collectively. Chris Brower, by the way, is on the end there. I don't know one's seen Chris yet. Nicky Broughton right here in the middle here, and of course Ryan Burns. So
yeah, so I can just kind of start out by giving a little backstory. Yeah, we kind of got together here and started also working the Rem Cru lead. I think Tom hit it right on. I think you struck gold with that find, Eric, and you know, big kudos to you on that. And you know, once you made that, when did you find the titanium antimony? Remember, maybe like 6 months ago, or
probably 4, 5, 6 months ago, something.
Right. Yeah. So when you made that find, you know, I immediately just started looking into Rem Cru titanium. And Chris, who is a member of the Vancouver Facebook group, he reached out to me. I'm an admin on there, and he reached out to me, and we kind of started, sharing some information of what we're finding on Rem Cru, and we just kind of started collaborating, and looking through patents and doing all of that. And then Ryan came along, and he was just a great addition to our team and great researcher, and we've all just been working a collaborative effort here to see if we can identify DB Cooper with this Rem Cru, with the Rem Cru lead that you provide for us. And I think I think we succeeded.
Yeah, Chris has built a spreadsheet. How do you build it?
Well, once Eric had found those 3 titanium antimony particles, we looked to see if there were additional patents that also reference that up to 18% antimony composition. And we found 12 other Rem Cru family patents, one of which notably is in the Tide era. And one of the individuals, and the individual who's on that Tide era patent, he's listed on 7 of those titanium antimony patents. And then we separately looked at patents that he had done other than that, and we found 36 patents that he had done in the Rem Cru crucible. And those range from specialty steels, ammunition, and other titanium alloys. So once we saw that he had 36 different, a wide variety of patents and so forth, then we did a deeper dive.
All right, and his name is Milton Berdahl. As you can see, he's the patent holder of the high antimony, particle. That's the spectrum at the top that shows that Eric found that shows the high antimony. And as you can see at the bottom, this is from the patent itself. It says up to 18% antimony. And you can see that this patent comes in March 12, 1965, which is after the time was released to be bought. And his name was Milton Bernard Berdahl.
Yeah, and if you notice, he's the only inventor listed on this patent. And every crucible patent that they have on with the antimony, he's the only crucible employee listed on any of the titanium antimony patents. The other inventors that are on the patents worked at Battelle Memorial Institute. They did some contract work with them, but Milton's he's the only guy from Rem Cru on any of their high SP patents.
And so when Nicky contacted me, we weren't really too sure about where Milton was from or what his background was. They just had the name. And so we looked and started doing some digging, and we found that Milton Berdahl was from Washington. The patent holder of this patent that's found on tie is from Washington, and he's from the Spokane area. And he was actually living in Washington at the time. He was living in a town called Pateros, Washington, at the time of the hijacking. So he was local. And we also found references to him being on the floor of Boeing with the SST project as well. And actually, I do believe, what percentage of the Blackbird was his?
One of the patents that he was listed on is for an alloy that covers 93% of each SR7.
A Washington resident, and which is, again, he's from Washington, he's from the Spokane area. we'll go more into him, but I guess.
And one more thing, he was the top inventor at Rem Cru. He had double the patents of the next guy below. So when Tom was talking about how there was 100,000 particles on the tie,
That's how we get to someone who is that prolific in his inventions. And we have, I believe, maybe 85 patents total we have found for this man. So he's a prolific inventor himself. So we'll show you a picture now of Milton Berdahl, and it's a bit striking. So there you have it. That is Milton Bernard Berdahl, and he was an older gentleman at the time. He was actually older than you would think Cooper was. He was 57, I believe, at the time.
58.
58, so he was older than me. But here's the thing about Milton Berdahl that we learned. This man was an athlete. So we have, at the time, we have him writing op-eds about jogging and running. Now, people didn't do that as much back then, as you know, but he did that. And he ate organic. He would grow his own food. And he invented things to make his vegetables grow better. So he has patents for food and beer fermentation, I think, something like that. Beer refrigeration, he has a patent for that too.
He was a winemaker.
A winemaker, right? And so he's interesting. And also we learned that he's actually during the war he served. During the war he was actually. Now I looked it up. He may be our first Cooper suspect, who's a legitimate suspect who was not in the military. He worked on the Manhattan Project. During the war. So he was a Manhattan Project scientist at the Hanford site, a chemist. So he built the Fat Man bomb that was on Nagasaki. He actually received a commendation from the Manhattan Project. He solved the fuel cell equation that saved the bomb, I think. So he was interesting, but I think he ran. Now, we don't know his financial state at the time. But we don't see that his money increased, but again, with the people from that era, as you know, think about many of your grandparents, you wouldn't know if they're rich or not, a lot of them. You wouldn't know if they came into money or not, because that's just not how the people lived back then. So we don't know what he did, but I believe his last patent might be in 71. I think it's perhaps coincidence, but it's interesting that this is mainly about 85 patents, and the last one he made was in 1971. So for the rest, we know he was still consulting for metals and things after 71, we believe, but not the way he was. One interesting point to note that I was able to find this, and Eric has found this as well. There was a titanium plant in Henderson, Nevada for TMCA, for Timet Corporation. And I found an article, August of 71, and this was actually the plant where he had a laboratory at the time in August 71 down there, one of his labs. They fired 450 people because the SST project was canceled. So his home lab at the time, down in Nevada, now he lived in Washington, but would go back and forth. His home lab fired 450 people. The plant manager who fired those people, his name was Don Cooper. So he lost a lot of employees to a plant manager named Don Cooper. So, interesting timing on all this. We don't know that, actually. We've asked his grandchildren, and they don't really remember him smoking. But again, I used the example before that I didn't know my grandfather smoked until I saw a photo of a business where people smoked a lot. That blue-collar world, the industry world. We have video of him. We actually have video footage of him, which we'll put on the Facebook group. We actually found color film of him, and he's very swarthy, as you can see. There's him there, and you can see his skin tone is olive. He was Norwegian, which it was news to us that Norwegian people have olive skin. Maybe Scandinavians were blonde-haired, blue-eyed, but apparently if you Google olive skin, olive complexion, you'll see Norwegians pop up. So he was a Norwegian man, and I'll let somebody else talk.
Also an avid golfer, and when he moved to Henderson, Nevada, he was playing, had a home right on the golf course and played a great deal of outdoor golf in those sunny conditions.
He was an everyday golfer, basically. His house in Washington was also next to a golf course, and his grandson said that he played golf every day as much as he could.
Yeah, that was probably his biggest passion besides politics. which he was also the mayor of Pateros for a good number of years.
It is an interesting character, and it's notable that the op-eds that he wrote extolling paganism and these sort of things weren't published near where he lived. He would send them away to get to publish them. And at the time of the hijacking, if he is Cooper, he was an alderman at the time in his town. Now his town was very small. His town was about 300 people. So it is kind of funny. We sometimes come across election results in the local paper from where he's from. It looks like Saddam Hussein because it's like Milton Berdahl, 297 votes, and then the challenger, 1 vote. Himself, obviously. So, yeah, I don't know what his rule in this town was, but...
Was a company, they dominated almost all of the titanium and specialty steel alloy patents at the time. So you'll see advertising that shows that their alloys were on the Boeing 727. You'll see that Boeing actually also came and visited Midland and shared information on their titanium program. So it was kind of a two-way street between Boeing and Rem Cru. So a lot of interaction there. Also, Rem Cru stood to benefit from the SST program, whether Lockheed or Boeing got it, because their patented alloys were to be selected for either program.
Right, and I'll just show some more photo comparisons with the other sketches here. So I do believe his head shape is about right, and his eyebrows and his eyes and his ears don't stick out like some suspects, like Dwayne Weber perhaps, doesn't have big ears. So his ears are about right.
And one distinguishing feature, if you listen to Roy Rose, who is the FBI sketch artist, he has a video up on YouTube where his grandson interviewed him about him doing the sketches for the FBI and D.B. Cooper. And the one thing he stressed, he said multiple times in the video, he didn't give too many features. The one thing he did stress was the protruding lower lip, which you can see here. Ryan did a great job with these illustrations here.
And the resolution's a little low, but you can see the quote at the top. But you can see the sketches here at the top, and it's kind of, the resolution's kind of bad, but you can see he had a fat lip, as you can see especially in perhaps this one here. You can see his lower lip there is protruding. So there was one feature Cooper had that the stewardesses could point out, and it was a protruding lower lip. And you do see that in the sketches. If you look at their lips there, you see these fat lips. And so he definitely had that. Even for those who know, Florence Schaffner did a Dracula-looking sketch from the Unsolved Mysteries episode in 1989. That's on the far right. And you can see that fat lip there. She still remembered his fat lip 18 years later. And this gentleman certainly possessed that. But he possessed that feature.
So I think one thing that would be kind of interesting here is to talk a little bit about the two suspects or two people of interest that have come out of Rem Cru Titanium. Because
Let me remind you real quick. I have a surprise for Eric. So we found recently, in the recent days, we found a photograph of Milton Berdahl and Vincent Peterson together.
Wow,
there you go.
that's crazy.
Yes.
So how about that?
There you go.
Want to surprise Eric with that?
Yeah.
It's both.
Talk about the vortex. I'm sure this is the first time first time we have anybody talking about Cooper's age is handwritten notes by Florence Schaffner, and she writes in his 50s on there. So as Cooper is sitting 70-something feet away, she writes in his 50s on there. We have plenty of people. We have a man in the audience here who called him a geeky old man. Well, both of these guys are geeky old men in 1971 for sure. If that's 1959, they look pretty geeky already. So add a few more years to them, and I'm sure they're definitely more geeky than that.
And importantly, they came from the same division of Rem Cru Titanium, which again, this is what the titanium antimony is pointing to. I mean, these particles are pointing to that. One of the other things, this relates specifically to Vince Peterson. I don't know about Berdahl, but as you notice from Tom's sketch, family tree sketch, there was an abundant amount of salt found on the tie. And it's not table salt, it's something that's a little more commercial in nature. Mr. Peterson actually studied extensively the relation, how salt affects titanium. And he actually wrote quite extensively about it. So there are several documents and research papers and things of that nature that he wrote, going back from about 1961 all the way up to 1971. April of 71, I think, is the last document related to that. So I've speculated openly that perhaps the salt on the tie is indicative of somebody that lived in a cold weather climate, someplace where they apply salt to the roads in the wintertime. Yeah, but this also could be an explanation for some of the salt on the tie there. So.
I'll let Chris talk about the other elements that are found on the tie. I'm sure you found the others, the salt, and he's our pro. And by the way, we have a paper, by the way, Vince Peterson and Milton Berdahl wrote a paper on the SR-71 for the military, I suppose, together on that.
Yeah, as we dove into the various patents that Milton either individually or with others was involved with it really is a whole variety of different specialty steels and many of the different metals on a tie, including some of the things like strontium and cerium.
Yes, we were able to, just to cover the butts of ourselves, we wanted to see if all the elements that Tom found were found in patents of his, and we were able to do that. We downloaded PDFs on Patent Guru of all his patents from post-tie era, and vanadium and all these other things. And I'll just make a comment real quick about people who doubt the tie. I was a tie doubter for a while until I wasn't, because here's the thing, it's like if you came across a tie that had all the ingredients of a cake on the back of the box on the tie, and that tie also had pieces of actual cake on the tie, you would think, well, this must belong to a baker. So all of these elements, vanadium, cerium, barium, all these other things are what make alloys, and that's what Rem Cru did. So not only do we have everything on the tie that makes alloys, including all these poisons, we actually have what we think are alloys on the tie that Eric found. So just for any doubters, and you saw the photographs of these people wearing ties, people would think, well, why are they wearing ties? Well, that's just, if you watch Mad Men, professional men wore ties back then, even in the labs. And they wore clip-on ties, like Cooper had, because they didn't want to get snagged on anything and choke them to death. It'd pop off if it got snagged on something.
One of the other things I mentioned about the tie, because that pops up occasionally, how do we know D.B. Cooper on the tie didn't pick it up at Goodwill or something like that the weekend before, which doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense to me to begin with. But one of the other things to consider is that it wasn't just the tie, it was also a tie clip that was found on there. D.B. Cooper had a tie and a tie clip, and you saw that in the one picture there. And that tie clip, and the one that's, and actually I'll just pull it up right here. Obviously this isn't the tie, but this is very similar to the tie, and this is the size of the tie. But this tie clip on here is exactly the same type of tie clip that D.B. Cooper had on. This one right here, this mother of pearl tie clip, it's the same era and everything, exactly the same one. I brought this to Tom's lab. Tom may remember, I know he's out there somewhere, there he is. And he put that under the, I guess the spectrometer is probably what we're talking about there, and it's plated in gold. It's plated in gold. And why that's significant is because, as Tom noted, there was a fair amount of, I don't want to say fair amount, there was gold on the tie from the tie clip. So it does appear, among other things, it does appear that that tie clip went with that tie on a regular basis. And I don't know that I've ever heard of anybody buying a combo tie clip like that at Goodwill or any other secondhand store. So I think that's indicative of the fact that we've got two separate pieces that they've been together obviously for quite some time, and therefore in all likelihood D.B. Cooper purchased the tie from the very beginning. It's important to note also that the tie itself was manufactured between 62 and 64, likely purchased by 65. And this is also consistent with when Rem Cru Titanium's research lab opened up, which was in the Pittsburgh area, which was 1964. It's also consistent when the Boeing 727 was produced, which was between basically 1960 and 1964. First flew on, or was first delivered in February of 64. So the timing with all of this stuff, and in some of the patents that Chris referenced there, 1965, I know, is all consistent. it does appear and I would argue that what we have here is a situation where Vince Peterson moved into the Pennsylvania area, Pittsburgh area, started working at the lab there in '64. At the same time, purchased a tie, which came from that time, at JCPenney, which was 20 minutes down the road there, and started wearing it to work, and picked up some of the titanium, antimony, and all the other things that were found on the tie. It all adds up. So you said one thing that caught my ear, you said that your Vince, or Berdahl rather, moved to Washington State in '67. Is that he said he was there from '67 until the time he passed away? Is that correct?
That's correct. We tracked him. Nicky, why don't you speak to where his movements were?
Yeah, so we tracked him from Beaver, PA. So he's living in Beaver until 1965. So one other thing I wanted to point out is Rem Cru actually had 2 research laboratories, one in Midland and then the one that opened up in Pittsburgh.
Titanium is what we're talking about, though. There's only one titanium lab, that was in Robinson. They had a research lab at Midland, but it was different. And actually, Vince worked at that one. He started off in Midland, then moved in '64.
Yeah, that picture there
Yes.
was from the Midland.
Yes, it would have to be because this is '59 before the lab even opened up.
That's right. But in 1964 and 1965, during that patent time, Milton Berdahl was in Beaver working at the Midland lab.
Right. And so he moved. He's actually moved to Connecticut he worked for DuPont Chemicals before the war, outside New York City, and then he moved with the Manhattan Project to Hanford, to Oregon, to work. It wasn't Washington, to work on that, and then he moved back to Pennsylvania and was there until '65, and then moved to Nevada for a couple of years, and then in '67 he bought his property in Pateros, and he lived there for the rest of his life.
And one thing that's important to know too, it just occurred to me, is you remember in Tom's presentation, he talked about the particles on the tie, and he also had a picture of a couple of particles that appeared to come from a machine shop. You had the coiled aluminum piece there, and then you had the one stainless steel with the titanium smeared into it, or the other way around. At the facility, the titanium research lab building in Pittsburgh, and I was just there literally 3 weeks ago, they actually had the building, which opened in '64, half of it was the research lab, which included the titanium research lab, and the other half included a shop. So what would happen is the engineers would work on experimenting with different alloys and things of this nature. Then they would actually bring the stuff to the shop, and they would have it cold pressed, cold rolled, drilled, things of this nature. So there is an explanation for how both the research type particles ended up on D.B. Cooper's ties, as well as the particles that appear to be indicative of something from a shop or with some sort of mechanical application involved with it.
I would be remiss if I didn't bring this up. It was interesting one thing about Berdahl that's interesting is that if you were here yesterday, I found the Dan Cooper short story that was an American, pilot. There's a short story of Dan Cooper from 1937 that we found. And so I have to have the foreign Dan Cooper skydiver guy here. I don't think any of these gentlemen would have been reading comic books anyway in their age, but the Dan Cooper short story there from Air Trails of 1937, as I mentioned, it's got the page before Dan Cooper and the page after Dan Cooper. Basically is about a guy named Clyde Pangborn. Okay, he was a Washington local hero. Okay, so basically, it turns out we found out after seeing this Clyde Pangborn guy before and after the Dan Cooper short story, their parents knew each other, Berdahl and Clyde Pangborn. They were actually from the same town in Spokane. So that's an interesting connection for sure.
I think what I'll do is open it up to questions, and I'll walk down there and hand over the microphone. We got Mark. Again, still talking about this, putting the pictures up there and everything. We've got a guy right over there who actually saw the real D.B. Cooper. I'm just dying to ask Bill, what the hell does he think? But I'm not going to do it because Bill's already said that he would have a very difficult, if not impossible, time identifying Cooper at this point. Mark.
I would still ask him, Eric.
I think he's getting tired of the question.
A couple of things. does turn out to be Berdahl, it's an amazing journey from knowing nothing about the case to getting into the case, then having Tom enter the case, doing some real science and doing a lot of it. I mean, the amount of work he's put in is just phenomenal. And then having it narrow the focus down to, a group of 11 scientists at Rem Cru. Pretty amazing. Even if it turns out not to be Cooper, this is a pretty interesting path we're going down. One thing, I wonder if we have any other pictures. Bill says, he probably couldn't identify Cooper today, but he did have a contemporary memory of an anomaly on the guy's neck, turkey waddle, I don't know what you call it. I don't know whether Bill sees in any of these pictures that same feature. So anyway, I'm just amazed that we've got to this point. It just shows that citizen sleuths can actually accomplish something. We may not solve the case, but boy, we're getting warm. The tie particles mean something, and now we're finding one place where you find every single element that's on the tie in their published papers and so forth. It's getting pretty interesting. So anyway, just want to thank Tom for all the work he's done. Thank all the panelists for what they've done, and Eric for what he does every year. I'm sure at great personal expense too. I'm just pretty excited about where we are today, even if this turns out not to be Cooper. We're making progress.
Thanks, Mark.
Here.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, three gentlemen. Incredible work. I'd be interested to know if you had any contact, either you, Eric, or you three, with the family of these two gentlemen and what their perspective was.
Go ahead and I'll talk.
Yeah, so I've been the point of contact with Berdahl's grandson, who actually inherited the property in Pateros when he passed away in 2002. But he ended up inheriting the property in Pateros, and he hasn't thrown any of his dad's belongings out, except maybe like the clothes and stuff, but like all of his files and paperwork of all of his inventions, everything that he was working on, are still there at his property in Pateros, and we're hoping to be able to go through that stuff and maybe find a smoking gun in there somewhere.
And to piggyback off this, they're not opposed. They're supporting this for sure. They're not. Basically, there's when Nicky told him that if we thought his grandfather was Nicky Cooper, after talking to him for a while, he shouted an expletive, and then paused for a second and basically said, "Well, he was kind of an odd guy."
And he started pondering like how he's gonna let his dad know, because his dad's older now, which was Milton's son. He's older now. He's getting up there in age, and he was like, "Oh, how am I gonna let Dad know about this?"
Yeah, and he's actually decided probably not to even tell his dad, because he wants his dad to have the memories of his father as it is, and not with this.
Yeah, seeing today to put Milton here up on the screen.
I'll point out too, when I say grandson, the grandson was about 32 years old when Milton died, so he knew him as a man as well.
Yeah, the family's always a tricky part, I tell you. But I have talked with the family. Specifically, he has a son who's now 65 years of age, and got quite a bit of information from him. Learned a lot about his father from him. I straight up asked him, "What do you think about the prospect of your father having been D.B. Cooper?" And he says he just can't see it. He just has a hard time envisioning his father having been D.B. Cooper. To the best of his knowledge, his father was always an honest man as far as that goes. But I've actually dug into this guy quite a bit, not only the family, but I've been to his house. Been to this guy's old house in Pittsburgh, and I've got permission from the current homeowner who actually bought the house from Mr. Peterson in '87, remembers it. I'm going to be actually doing a search at the property here this coming month. And I've talked with a neighbor who was a neighbor with him, lived right across the street for 12 years when Mr. Peterson lived in that house. So there's a lot of interesting stuff that's come out of it. But to answer your question directly, yeah, the family, I have talked with the family. Let's go with Josh back here, and then I'll kind of move it off to the side there, and then we'll sort of wrap it up. So a few more questions.
Quick comment and then a question. The quick comment is, first of all, there's a term I learned a few years ago from the Oregon brewing industry, craft brewing, called cooperation. So you may be competing with each other in the sense of which guy it is, but you're cooperating together. To echo what Mark said, this is amazing what everyone's been doing together. So I really really appreciate that. Much respect to the four of you, and Tom, obviously. The quick question I have is, what's the grudge? Right? Remember the whole comment about a grudge? If there is, we mentioned about layoffs for both suspects. What's the grudge if there is one?
Let me say something real quick here, because you made an interesting comment about the cooperation or whatever. I'm not competing with anybody. So like I said from the very beginning, let me be very clear about this. I don't have a horse in the race. I don't get to choose who D.B. Cooper was. I mean, D.B. Cooper decided that for himself 51 years ago. My job is not to figure out, not to anoint somebody D.B. Cooper or appoint somebody D.B. Cooper. My job is to read the tea leaves, the evidence tea leaves to the best of my ability, and see where that takes us, because I want to find out who the real guy was. So that just a little clarification with respect to that. So the question, I'll let you guys answer that.
You know, one thing I'll add is that the very last thing we knew about this gentleman was what he looked like. We just followed the tie particles and his work history and his family history, and then it all came together when
We didn't get a photograph of him until we contacted the grandson. So it was well into it that we even saw what he looked like, which is, I think, the right way to do it. Because some people will have a sketch and they go, well, I need to make that, I have a picture, I need to make that man D.B. Cooper. You know, that's not how this works for either of us. It's about the science. And as far as cooperation, or whatever that word was, we were aware essentially of who each other's persons were. We made sure that we weren't, because otherwise, if they were on the same people, we would just work together. But, you know, there's no animosity or anything, because I mean, I'm convinced that it came from Rem Cru, whether it's Peterson or Berdahl or somebody else. I mean, and we wouldn't be here without Eric, so it's not like there's any...
Yeah, not at all. And, you know, we actually collaborated with Eric in the early stages. The gentleman at Rem Cru Research, we actually provided him the contact information because, you know, it was his find, it was what he was looking into, and, you know, there's no competition here. Like what Eric said, we just want the truth. That's it.
I'm going to do one question on the right and then one question on the left here. So, like, you got multiple hands, I'm just going to see right there. So, right here.
Hey, forgive me if the records don't exist from this long ago, but I'm wondering if either of these men have any history where they would be tied into skydiving.
No.
You got a Philadelphia Eagles fan, man? All right. Next question. No.
Not that we have found. He was an athlete, and he lived near jump centers for a good bit of his life, but we don't know. His brother was a dive bomber pilot. For a second there, for a hot minute there, I thought maybe his brother had done it, because his brother actually sank Berdahl's brother actually sank two Japanese destroyers by himself as a dive bomber pilot, and he served in Korea as well. So he was the Billy Badass of the family. And so I was like, well, maybe Berdahl left his tie over at Oscar's house one day, you know, but turns out Oscar was 5'6", so no, wasn't Oscar.
Yeah, and as far as Vince Peterson is concerned, as far as asking his son about that, it does not appear he had any kind of skydiving experience. Now, he was in the military, he was in the Merchant Marines, which is associated with the Navy, so he did serve in World War II. So, you know, perhaps there was something there, I don't know, but I've been unable to verify that there was any sort of experience whatsoever in skydiving. So we got a question here.
You mentioned, you know, these two gentlemen that you're considering now. Have you looked into any of the other 11 that worked at Rem Cru during that time as a possible suspect?
Yes, I mean, we tried to look at, I have a list of 61 different individuals from the Crucible family who got a patent in the 50s or 60s who lived in the Midland or Pittsburgh area. So we were looking for military background or paratrooper, that type of thing, but everything that would connect all these different type particles and things kept coming back to these gentlemen.
And it made sense to start from the patent holder himself. You know.
I think he's the only individual, I think, from Rem Cru that we've been able to, that we saw ties back to the Pacific Northwest, which I think is very important.